Welcome to another episode of Zelf on the Shelf. I'm Tanner.
I'm Sam.
And today we are going to be doing something that we haven't done in a little minute, which is reading Mormon apologetics so you don't have to.
You know our video ideas have dried up when. This is not ideal for us, but we are committed to keeping the content machine going. Please support us on Patreon or donate via PayPal or Venmo.
I mean, the equivalent feels like if people wanted to pay us to go out and hit ourselves with a hammer. That's kind of how this feels.
I saw my first flower today on a no-coat walk.
In the world?
And now I'm just instantly ruining it. Just shitting on my mood by doing this.
First flower of spring. I just got a rake and some seeds, and I'm about to go to town on my yard. Haven't even asked my landlord or anything. I'm just planting flowers everywhere.
What landlord's going to have an issue with you creating a gorgeous garden?
When I originally talked about it, he was like, well, I don't want to have, you move out, and then all of a sudden I've got all these plants I got to take care of. And I'm like,
please.
He's a nice guy. I don't mean to talk shit on my landlord.
No, we are a pro-landlord channel around here. My dad's a landlord.
We are pro some people who are landlords.
We are pro tiny, polite landlords who have 1 to 2 small flats and don't raise the rent.
Management companies, we are coming at you with torches and pitchforks.
But please don't raise my rent. I can't afford it. 51 degrees today. It's actually like 57 by now, probably.
Oh, wow.
57.
Wow, we should be filming on the deck.
The deck.
That you have. Let's go to the veranda. Oh, yay. Let's do this.
I was scouring the Mormon subreddit this morning, just kind of seeing what's going on, like to keep tabs a little bit. And they were really vibing with this article from Fair Mormon called Fear Leads to the Dark Side, Navigating the Shallows of Misinformation. And so I thought, what's it all about? They're all into it. Let's see what's going on.
Misinformation would be a good drag name. I know that it's a Star Wars reference, so I don't mean to get so nitpicky off the bat. Give me 30 seconds at least. But it is hilarious that we're surely going to hear a rant about the dangers of biased sources and how anyone who paints a completely dark picture is surely a bad person, a bad source of information. And it's like starting off casting people who disagree with you as the dark side, the evil side. You can't get any more biased than that. Again, like, if I'm disagreeing with Mormons, I'm not like, oh, you are evil, you are lying, you are deceiving. I'm just like, you probably haven't analyzed all the information, and if you have, then let's talk about it, and here's why I think I'm right, and where you maybe, and it's just as simple as that. It's not like trying to defame another person's character or assume ulterior motives.
You're like, we understand that you probably earnestly believe these things, that they bring you comfort, that your family life is centered around them. We have empathy for all of that. Tana grew up Mormon. I was Mormon for 6 years. We get it. We don't need to cast anyone in the story as a villain.
But no, if you're
an us versus them high demand religion, you do need to cast people as villains. So
let's learn about the dark side.
So this person says a disclaimer that their native tongue is German, so if their English is a little bit off, that's why. So we won't roast any bad writing if we see it. Okay. Okay, so this person writes, what's their name? Oh no, this is Renee Krevolt. I don't know who that is.
Sounds German.
Yeah. They look like a general authority based on that picture, but who knows?
A regional authority.
Yeah. Back in the 7th century BC, the prophet Jeremiah bemoaned that the written documents of his day were not trustworthy. He writes, "How can you say we are wise and the law of the Lord is with us? But behold, the lying pen of the scribes has made it into a lie." When Samuel the Lamanite proclaimed the signs for Christ's birth and death, the wayward Nephites thought that the believers would serve them alternate facts.
I love the phrase alternate facts.
Alternate facts. And then the quote is from Helaman. It says, "They will, by the cunning and the mysterious arts of the evil one, work some great mystery which we cannot understand, which will keep us down to be servants to their words, and also servants unto them. For we depend upon them to teach us the word, and thus they will keep us in ignorance if we will yield ourselves unto them all the days of our lives."
I so often in my day-to-day life hear your voice in the video we did with Bryce now I can't even
Blank
remember
and
how.
Angle?
Blank and Angle, yeah, I can only remember how we did it in the video. But you going, is he speaking in riddles? Like that, like, if you're presenting me with an alternate fact that's totally different, it's just, like, mysterious. I can't wrap my head around it. This is crazy.
Bring back Mormon enforcement. When Jesus was resurrected, the critics claimed his disciples came by night and stole him away while we slept.
Obviously, not a bad argument.
I was going to say, actually, I've never really thought about the prospect of, zealous Jesus fans stealing his body.
Yeah, and I don't even think that was necessary to do it. They literally just had to be like, the body's not there anymore, and the average person is not like, I went and checked. It's just like, what's his name? Biblical scholar. Oh, how am I blanking on this right this second?
I couldn't name a single biblical
Bart
scholar.
Ehrman. Bart Ehrman, fantastic biblical scholar. Started out as an evangelical at like a Bible university, getting his higher degrees in that, and through the course of his doctorate study was like, oh, this isn't real. But he does this bit on miracles and how, by definition, a miracle is the least likely source of an event. Like, a miracle is something that denies the laws of ordinary physics, and so to believe a miracle is to believe in the least likely explanation, which is kind of silly, if you ask me. It's like, oh, my keys disappeared. It probably got abducted by an alien.
Remember that one time I lost that lipstick and then just truly felt like it disappeared into thin air, and just had like 1 or 2 days where I went down a Reddit rabbit hole and became truly convinced that possibly objects could just disappear into like a parallel universe. It really did a number on me. But then eventually I found it in my makeup bag, and it was just a different color than I remembered it being in the packaging. But it does make you think, because obviously back in Jesus's day, they didn't know about the placebo effect or spontaneous remission of, illnesses. And
I don't think the miracles really happened, by the way. I mean, the people are like, how can you deny there were witnesses in the Bible that saw the miracles? And it's like, that's not true. What the Bible is and I say this every time, I'm sorry for repetition, but it's like third and fourth hand accounts written decades after the facts by people who were not there in other countries and in other languages, saying, we saw all these miracles, you should join this movement because there's miracles happening. But we don't have any contemporary evidence that miracles actually happened. Jesus was probably like just some guy, and every culture is rife with stories like that of the great mythical heroes who do these amazing supernatural works. And
of course, things happen outside of our current level of understanding of what can happen and why. But
sure,
yeah, have we talked? I don't think I've talked about this on the channel with you, or even with you, but I saw a TikTok that was it sounds so basic, but I just hadn't thought of it. It was talking about how people back in biblical times, they didn't have glasses or contact lenses, and how so many things throughout history could potentially be explained by the fact that people were just seeing phenomena in the distance that are super blurry. And I was like, why have I never even thought about that? They didn't even have glasses. Like, quite a high percentage of people, don't have perfect vision. So this guy's talking about how people were doubting the Jesus story back in his day. And don't get me started about the different versions of who Joseph Smith was and what he did.
I think he is going to get started.
The different versions of events that he himself described in multiple different conflicting ways at different times.
Yeah, one time Joseph Smith is monogamous, except for when he's proposing to Nancy Rigdon, and then,
Fake news. I hate how Trump just made fake news just standard vernacular now. It kills me. Fake news is as old as one guy telling another his version of a story. Nevertheless, some things have changed. In the early days...
That's not fake news.
I know, that's just people having different perspectives. In the early days of Christianity, the book scroll was substituted by the codex. Dun, dun, dun! This meant that books, though still tedious in production... I thought I was just going to say books. Though still tedious. And I was like, yes, preach!
Yeah, books suck. I'm not going to read a book.
Though still tedious in production and expensive to obtain, became available to more people. And novels became far more widespread than they were before. For early Christianity, the switch to the new medium became a selling argument. But also apocrypha and
pseudepigrapha, the word that book of Joseph Smith, faithful Joseph Smith scholar Richard Bushman used to describe the works of Joseph Smith. Just little side note.
Or as we would say today, historic novels became a rave.
Pseudepigrapha is when somebody retroactively writes pretending to be something else. So like many of the books of Isaiah are that, the books in the Apocrypha, the various Gospels that have been taken out of the New Testament, even though they all qualify as that because they were all written by different people, not the original claimed authors.
Would One Direction fan fiction count as pseudepigrapha?
Unless only if they were saying like I am Nick Jonas or whoever.
But
was in
it's
One
adjacent
Direction.
because sometimes they do.
Yeah, someone's gonna murder me for that comment.
I don't know why you would instantly leap from Harry Styles to Nick Jonas. They're completely.
I was like, who was? Yeah.
So historic novels became a rave, though less than 10% of the population could read. In those days, the precursors of newspapers were the Acta Diurna, which were government bulletins carved in metal or stone and posted in public places. Writing books was something for the learned and the wealthy. Written news only came through the government. That didn't make them true, but at least they were consistent. At least.
This is funny that he's talking about books and like how even the word book is so anachronistic in so many scriptures and should be an obvious of the very problems that he's pointing out here, but I
don't really understand, like, the government propaganda wasn't necessarily true, but at least it was consistent. I'm like, is it an at least? Is that like a win in any way? If anything, it means that you're just not getting any other perspectives. In the 16th century, the first weekly news were handwritten, but they too only were for the intelligentsia.
Like
Intelligentista, is that supposed to say? I don't know. But either way,
I think intelligentsia is...
Intelligentsia? Mm-hmm. Well, I was really hoping I could start using that word to describe us, but I obviously can't. This changed when Gutenberg invented the printing press. Religious people are always so much talking about Tim Robinson, the fucking printing press, because it just ruined everything.
Also, what a Eurocentric idea. The Chinese actually invented the printing press ages before, but we are like, it only is real if it happened in Europe by white people.
Big magic. And book production became far cheaper and easier. Not only was the world flooded with Bibles, also the first printed newspapers were published in Germany. For 100 years, those news were heavily censored by the government. And we know that for many families, the only book they ever owned was the Bible. With the invention, they are talking about how that for some families, the only book that they owned was the Bible. So, like, not a lot else is going to get in there.
Right, and I bet we're about to hear about the dangers of propaganda.
Well, we are, because with the invention of the high-speed press in the early 19th century... I also love when religious people will be like, the printing press was good, but then, like, after that...
That's when things were...
like, an accelerated information spread was bad.
Kind of like how the Restoration paved the way for an explosion of technology, including the internet, which has actually turned out to be very dangerous.
So, high-speed press in the early 19th century, information became cheap for the first time. And late that century, lots of people went into publishing their own magazine or newspaper. New journalism was made for the masses. This led to a rise in propaganda. And then there's a picture of the Nauvoo Expositor right there, to back up that cheeky little propaganda claim.
Oh my god.
Do you want to just, for the uninitiated, explain the Nauvoo Expositor? Just in case, sorry for those of you that know everything.
So, Joseph Smith had...
Had a lot of wives.
He had a lot of wives.
Saying he didn't have any. Well, he had one.
Toward his tail end of his stint in Nauvoo, he proposed to the wife of William Marks, the leader of the Council of the Quorum of the 12 in Nauvoo, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's the situation. But he proposed to the wife of William Marks, and William Marks was like, "Hey, what the heck? You said you were monogamous. What's this going on?" And Joseph's like, listen, if you got a problem with it, you can leave.
Can a monogamous man not propose to another woman once in a while?
So then, because they were like, hey, Joseph Smith is making advances on us, he got excommunicated from the church and then totally slandered. So imagine that. You're living in an almost 100% Mormon-dominant community with Joseph Smith being like the absolute pivotal point. He does something to you, you just talk about it, and then he maligns your whole character, kicks you out of your position, you lose your work. Like, it's crazy. And so then they're like, okay, well, if you're not going to listen, we're going to talk about this. And they wrote in this newspaper, and I heard about the Nauvoo Expositor my whole life growing up in the church, but I never once read it till I was on my way out of the church. And when I did, it made me so depressed because by that time I had studied the Joseph Smith story well enough to know that they were telling the truth. It wasn't like they were just like throwing about a bunch of lies. It was like, hey, here's what is actually happening and why it's a problem. And Joseph Smith found the truth so dangerous that he ordered the press to be destroyed. So they went in, we love the free press, freedom of speech, went in, burned down the press, and for doing that act of disorderly conduct, he was placed in prison where he ultimately was killed. But calling that propaganda is so silly. Like that would be seen as like an independent news source. Propaganda would be like, I don't know, the Millennial Star, the official publication of the most wealthy and powerful organization in a geographical region. That's what propaganda is.
I just think it's interesting because America refers to itself as the land of the free, and
brave.
freedom of press is one of the most important factors in how free a country is, because, you know, how free is the spread of information? If you're critical of the government, how free are you to talk about that and to, you know, spread awareness of what the government is doing? The US, in the Press Freedom Index...
Ooh, you have to scroll a lot.
in 2022, it scored 72.74. So just for contrast, Norway scored 92.65, Denmark scored 90, Sweden scored 88, Estonia 88, Finland 88, Ireland 88, Portugal 87, Costa Rica 85, Lithuania 84, New Zealand 83. There's so many countries that have a freer press than the US, basically. There's also not one single metric by which the US is at the top with the Freedom of Democracy Index, like not freedom of press, not free. I can't remember what the other things are, but it doesn't rank highest in anything.
Can you believe this communist propaganda? We ought to take away your right to say such things about the freest country on earth.
And just so you know, the Press Freedom Index is compiled and published by Reporters Without Borders, in case you're interested.
I only trust doctors without degrees.
So anyway, back to Fair Mormon. In our days, we are inundated in a mass of blogs, advertisements, and partisan texts published almost without cost via the internet.
I get a text and I'm
This
like,
comes
is
at
this
great
partisan?
There are hoaxes that are believed to be real and real information that people claim are fake news.
Oh, is now a good time to bring up the Kinderhook plates, or...
Academic studies and research are published on the fast track, and often the real quality is doubtful. Yeah, academic studies which famously move at like a rapid pace. No, I feel like the sort of research science world moves so slow. And like we're looking, you know, thinking about research about certain things. It's like 8 years from now, even though we're already pretty certain that this is the thing, it's going to be like 8 more years till it gets approved, you know.
Ask any grad student how fast the process is.
And then there's this little like image that they've got, and it's a picture of John Oliver, who I consider to be a pretty solid source. Like I feel like the stuff that, he's a brilliant infotainer. I feel like the stuff he does is well researched. It may have a left-leaning bias because
so does
the
reality.
truth often does. Yeah. But then the text on the image says, ironically, drivers of fake science are embedded in the current science publishing system, intended to disseminate evidenced knowledge. In which the intersection...
I'm sorry. If you can provide evidence for your knowledge, it can't by definition be fake. It could be maybe not entirely understood.
Interpreted poorly.
But that is literally how the academic system goes forward. You put together your evidence and compile an argument. Like, what are you talking about?
Also, it's so weird how there's just this text on a picture of John Oliver. And then it says, in which the intersection of science advancement and reputational and financial rewards for scientists famously wealthy, and publishers incentivize gaming and, in the extreme, creation and promotion of falsified results. Okay, there's like a conversation to be had about, you know, what kind of scientific research gets funded, and, you know, obviously like the quality of research can vary widely. I mean, that's why science is a system where they're supposed to be like, you know, it's supposed to be repeatable, verifiable, peer-reviewed, blah, blah, blah. But to claim that this is coming from Fair Mormon, like to claim that Fair Mormon puts itself above just apparently the whole scientific community.
I know, saying anything is fake science while asserting young Earth creationism is the most batshit bonkers
Does Fair
thing I've
Mormon
ever heard.
support young
Surely
Earth?
they do, because all the Mormon prophets have, so they can't agree with evolution unless they're just like
I'm putting a pin
openly
in that.
defying the prophets.
We're going to look up Fair's response on young Earth creationism after this piece, which I'm already bored with.
I'm going to be writing a treatise on evolution soon because it was
love when
from
you do
Kara
treatises.
Nuance Ho did a post about evolution and about the prophets. None of them like supporting it. Some have been like kind of loose, like David O. McKay or whatever.
Which,
but
by the way, Brother Comfortman at BYU Idaho gave us a whole Book of Mormon lesson on how the prophets, I've talked about this before, but denied evolution. And then he was like, so it's up to you. But this is what our guys have said.
it's just sad because I see it as perhaps the most beautiful, transcendent, connective principle ever discovered by humanity. One that like makes sense of the world and really, like I said, connects us to everything. And for that reason is so beautiful and so pertinent and so widely backed by every branch of science that to deny it is
And
to
pure
look at
common
the
sense.
noonday sun and say it's not there.
Yeah.
And yet Mormons and believers and Christians will just push that all aside to be like, no, this century-old book that has talking snakes and talking donkeys is the real thing that happened. It's like,
Oh, this is interesting. So this person writes, my motivation for this presentation came last year when someone copied the look and feel of MormonNewsroom.org. This is, I think, a couple years old.
this was Jonathan Streeter, wasn't it?
Used a URL that differed from the official one by only a dash, and there published the fake news that President Nelson had apologized for the priesthood ban. I remember when that happened and all the progressives on Twitter were fuming, saying it was racist for him to do that. But I thought it was quite a brilliant piece of
Satire.
well, yeah, and like PR, it drew attention to the issue in a powerful way.
I love when people with no sense of humor call parody fake news.
I know. For those of you who don't know, Jonathan Streeter posted a fake, I guess they've explained
He's
it,
the Thinker of Thoughts is his website.
posted a seemingly real apology from Russell M. Nelson about the racist priesthood ban. And I think it was kind of brilliant because it got Mormons believed it and they experienced the relief of that. And then they had to wrestle with the fact that actually hadn't happened and it came from an ex-Mormon, which is so interesting because also a lot of them obviously felt the spirit when they read it. To me, that's a genius move to draw attention to the issue. Anyway.
I'm about to publish some fake news about Russell M. Nelson telling all the Utah Mormons that it's time to move to Missouri.
So this person says, it was the first time in 20 years that I fell for an internet hoax.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
This
I've
guy's got
fallen for
chain email
hundreds.
written all over him.
And it made me think, how do we know if an information we receive is trustworthy or
You
not?
literally believe in Mormonism. You have fallen for so many hoaxes. I do have to bring up the Kinderhook plates at this point.
No. Do you need to?
I can wait if...
I just noticed something I accidentally skimmed over. So this guy published the fake news that President Nelson had apologized. Though this was against what I personally believe, I was fooled because I trusted the source and I hadn't noticed the slight difference in URL. So you were admitting that it was against what you personally believe, aka it was against the racism that I believe in, but it did come from the one guy who is the source of information that I trust. Just no awareness of that whole phenomenon that's going on. And it doesn't seem like we're going to be acknowledging that. It's just about like, I was fooled, damn it, we all got to be careful.
Sounds like
We
very
might
effective piece
accidentally
of
be convinced
satire.
to become less racist if we're not on the lookout.
Okay, that's another thing about evolution, that I just like...
Go off, King.
Oh, evolution disbands all the racist theories that Mormonism is hinged on, which is one of the reasons why they can't support it, because according to Mormonism, you have Cain who slays Abel and then gets cursed with a black skin, and then his descendants make it on, Ham makes it onto Noah's Ark, which is the most batshit impossible story ever told, and then through that bloodline, Egypt happens, and there he's the father of the black people, the fence-sitters in heaven, according to Mormons, various Mormon prophets. And it's like, if you were to believe in evolution, then you would see the reality that has been confirmed by archaeology, genetics, linguistics, you name it, that human life originated in Africa, and that we all started there and moved out from there, and skin started losing pigments as people moved into less sunny areas. Like,
But you don't
to
have to
agree
be
with
a
evolution,
genius
you
to,
have to let go of your racism, and they literally don't want to do that, because to say, oh, it's not the racist thing we believed, is to say, oh, those prophets were racist.
Yeah. And I love how they're not even content with speciesism and like putting themselves above every other animal on this planet. They also need to feel superior to another group within our species. It's like not enough to just be top of the food chain.
No, yeah.
So the first time this person fell for a hoax in 20 years. Congratulations.
Except that, Kinderhook plates. Joseph Smith was a hoaxer, a huckster, approached Joseph Smith with metal plates that he had fabricated and said, Joseph, we found these ancient records. Can you translate them? And he's like, you bet your ass I can. And he writes in his journal, today I began translation on the Kinderhook plates, an ancient record written by the hand of, some biblical character, maybe even Ham. And then, he gets distracted, obviously, because he's just bullshitting. He's like, I don't have time for this. I'm faking 7 other documents and proposing to, 3 14-year-olds. It's a lot of work.
It's all hanging in the balance. I do not have any more bandwidth.
So then for years, decades, up to over a century, the church is literally in their publication saying the Kinderhook plates are yet another evidence of the veracity of the work of Joseph Smith, a true testimony of a true prophet, until the 1960s come and they do an actual carbon dating of those plates and realize, this was for sure a hoax. And then they just quietly
Just like when they discovered the Rosetta Stone and realized that the papyri Joseph claimed he translated the Book of Abraham from was also nothing to do with anything he wrote in the Book of Abraham. So we have 2 solid examples of him being a massive translation liar, but apparently that doesn't seep into...
So the first hoax he's ever become aware of falling for.
Yeah, I was going to say. A few years ago, someone claimed that modern genetics had proven that the Book of Mormon was true. Another case is that of apostates who claim to be the new prophets, and that the first presidencies and the apostles have lost the way in the past, and that they have to set the church straight. That's just kind of a standalone paragraph.
Setting the church straight is the most egocentric, boring type of thing you could do.
Reforming that
Move on.
multi-billion-dollar org, no thank you. Before the Spring General Conference this year, again, this is a couple years old, the net was full of speculations about changes in the church. One rumor, which really got traction, was about missionary callings, whose duration would be announced after General Conference, firing up the imagination. People thought that this would mean shorter mission periods. Who cares? The majority of the baby boomers, millennials, and students cannot discern advertisements from real information, and a majority cannot discern news from fake news.
I love how British people pronounce advertisements.
I know, I realized that after I said it. But even I feel like it's older people that say advertisements, not younger people would say advertisements, which I
think
said
of a
before.
kid on Mary Poppins. I think you're doing it right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is true that a lot of people are vulnerable to misinformation. I think we all know that.
Absolutely.
So we agree with you there. With Pilate, we might ask, what is truth? Is it Pilate? Is that how you say it?
Mm-hmm. I call him Pilate.
I know, that's where my brain goes. Joseph Pilate. How do we discern? How do we evaluate? How do we understand? Let's get into it.
Good questions.
This is how we can all make ourselves less vulnerable to misinformation, which I'm always trying to do. So this is great. Header, faster decision making. Subheader, good or bad information. Shortcuts to decision making. We live in the so-called information age. Information is the most important resource of our era. It's maybe attention, and it grows exponentially. The sum of all facts available has never been larger than in our days. On the other hand, the mass of data is impossible to manage, let alone know for one person alone. We live in an era of specialists, and every specialist only knows a small area of the wider academic picture. Yes, that's true. That's why I feel like we should generally go to specialists who have devoted their entire life to studying one,
And then see how that connects with the work of other specialists and other specialists.
Rather than just these randos who are claiming to have a holistic picture of everything, who are just 90-year-old men. Now, if some new information comes in, the best thing would be to value it on its own, to get to the bottom of things and then decide, this is just such a boring word salad. But of course, with the massive information being that vast, most of us cannot do that, so we use shortcuts. These shortcuts help us separate the wheat from the chaff and to focus on the importance. For instance, there's the thing called peer review.
A little thing called peer review.
What do other experts in the area say about this claim? If I am not an expert, it's very helpful for me to know if some claim is state-of-the-art and accepted fact, or if it is a minority position and the one promoting it is seen as a quack by accepted experts. Yes. So no awareness so far of the fact that every claim made by Mormonism is generally not accepted by specialists and is only accepted by quacks. The alternative would be to become an expert myself, which is not possible on every given issue. And yet, those shortcuts are not foolproof, because lots of people don't agree with what I believe, which is obviously problematic and shows that they're not specialists or experts, because if they were, they would validate everything I think and believe.
I wonder if he's going to at all mention the importance of holding your beliefs lightly and making sure that they can be adaptable to new information.
Here's some examples of why these shortcuts are not foolproof. An article that didn't go through peer review may contain very good information.
Sure.
True. Albert Einstein reviewed quantum mechanics with the famous words, "God does not play dice."
I have to fact check that.
And God does not play dice, and it seems he was wrong. I don't understand that. Like, God doesn't take a chance on anything. AKA evolution can't be real because there's no random happenings. Like, what does that mean? God does not play dice.
It means that he doesn't leave things up to chance. I think he absolutely would.
Seems like he would.
I think he absolutely would.
Yeah. Maybe he has an algorithm behind it that's too complex for us to know, but like you'd have to at some point just let it run on its own.
Yeah. I mean, Alan walks through this thought experiment of being like, most people don't actually imagine eternity. They're like, I just can't wait to be blissed out. And it's like, you would live 6 lifetimes and then be so absolutely bored and overwhelmed with nihilism from just everything being... That would be meaningless, essentially. Like, if you were just kept on living, you would get so bored, and eventually you would say, surprise me. Like, after living out every single fantasy you could possibly think of, creating every single type of earth and every type of situation and this and that, you would eventually just be like, okay, I need novelty, surprise, in order to have any kind of interest or...
Humans would rather give themselves an electric shock than just sit peacefully by themselves for 10 minutes.
Yeah, and you're going to tell me you can just sit through eternity?
Yeah, no way.
You have eternity, always, lasting forever. Like, you cannot fathom it. And so he says that that's essentially the Hindu worldview, is like God being like, I'm going to go to sleep and have myself a little dream where I'm not in control, and yet it's... You know, and then just witness what happens when I am not in charge, even though...
Which is fun, you know, when you're falling asleep and you're just kind of observing your subconscious and you're like, it's just nice to be not in charge and not have anything to do, just like kind of ride it. There is a logical fallacy called argumentum ad populum. It means that something is considered to be true because the majority of relevant people accept it, which is basically what peer review is all about, right?
No, that's not what it's all about.
No, not at all.
It's not just a democracy of facts.
Yeah, that logical argumentum ad populum, something being considered true because the majority of relevant people accept it, might be, say, continuing to believe in Mormonism because everyone in your community and everyone who you've been told to believe your whole life all buys into it.
That was like somebody came on our comments the other day and was like, how dare you make having souls seem so foolish? Most people believe in souls. And I was like, okay, you're homogenizing a lot because only 30% of people in the world are Christian. And of those denominations and all the other religions, everybody has different views about the nature and existence of the soul. So saying like, oh, everybody deserves this, everybody believes this, therefore I'm most likely right.
Yeah. Peer review is... Again, going back to the, this person advocated for going to specialists. Peer review is a bunch of specialists all looking at it and seeing whether it holds up and looking at the methodology to see whether it's legitimate and looking at the conclusions that were drawn to see if they're legitimate. What's a better system than that? Like, we haven't really come up with a better system than if we're trying to figure out if something is true, we do research that is verifiable and, is reliable for all these reasons, all these parameters we have around research that make it good. And then get a bunch of experts to verify that it actually, there's no better system.
And a person becomes an expert by demonstrating that their research is advancing the field of knowledge and that that's being scrutinized by people who are also studying and dedicating their lives to studying that area and then building models that work within all the other areas of study. So just being like, oh, that's the same as literally anybody having an opinion. It's like, okay, if you're sick, do you just tweet out what your thing is and then just believe whatever the answer is? I do. Or do you go to a doctor? And why would you trust a doctor over Jim on Facebook? Well, because the doctor has credentials and has actually studied this and probably knows more about what's going on than just your average person.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean every single doctor is flawless, but they're probably more flawless than Jim on average. Don't take your chances. One could even argue that peer review is a heightened just laying into peer review. Peer review is a heightened form of an autoritate.
Yeah, no, you're
argument.
Just comparing apples and oranges, or that's probably even the wrong metaphor. That's just not what that is at all.
I haven't heard that phrase before, but it says we accept what the majority of peers say because we believe them to be authorities. We don't believe them to be authorities. They have proven themselves to be authorities. That's peer review, right?
I don't think he knows what peer review is. I
Not
think he's
because
literally
of their
like, oh, if your
arguments.
peers agree, if all your peers are in agreement, then it must be true. That's obviously wrong. And it's like, that's not what that is.
Just like scientists and all their friends.
Tell me you've never
standing
published a
this?
real paper without telling me you've never published a real paper.
None of this has anything to do with the information or argument brought forth itself. I mean, yeah, sure. Like, obviously, peer-reviewed stuff can be incorrect and all that, but I think we all know what this is in the service of.
Yeah.
Nevertheless,
Anti-intellectualism.
peer review gives us an indicator to discern quality in an area we're not experts in. Thank God.
Thank you, at least, for that.
Then he talks about chain email hoaxes, which I just don't really want to.
I'm telling you, he's got it written all over him.
Let's just skip down to manipulation. It is well known that it is hard work to lie consistently. Not if it's just completely in your nature and you're kind of incapable of doing anything else.
I think it ends up being quite hard. In fact, you end up getting like mobs of angry people riled up against you. You may find yourself getting shot to death in Carthage jail. It is tough.
There are many markers that show up when someone tells a lie face to face. Someone will exaggerate their mimic and gestures. Others will reduce those nonverbal signs, but in all cases, they want to be believed. It is a common fact that emotions have a much bigger part in our decision-making than most of us feel comfortable with, and often we rationalize our emotional decision-making after the fact. That's why those who try to sell their lies will try to circumvent our logic as quickly as possible so that we can be brought to an emotional decision without realizing it.
Hey.
It's giving the missionaries trying to get me to commit to baptism before I even knew what this fucking church was all about. Those people are like stage magicians, dare I say, treasure diggers, who try to spotlight their right hand so that we do not see what they do with their left.
Or actual ritual magicians
To make this
whose performances lead them to buried treasure with angel guardians.
To make this more clear, let me share a personal story. Okay, let's read the personal story. I was baptized in the Lord's Church at age 8, and by 9, my mother made us leave the church, and I had First Communion as a Catholic. Mother wound. Attended altar boy school, and so on. Having read the New Testament earlier, at age 10, I read the Old Testament from cover to cover for the first time. At the age of 12, I started to investigate religion on my own. I met with Lutherans and JWs, read the Talmud and the Quran. I found a Book of Mormon when I was 13. My father was very philosophically inclined agnostic, who taught me that we need to experiment in order to check if theories hold water or not. So I was impressed when I read Moroni's promise, and as this was clearly an experiment.
No.
But peer review is sometimes. And I learned by it that God is really there. At 13, beautiful.
Jamie Kennedy has devised better experiments. The host of the Jamie Kennedy Experiment, where it's a prank show.
So, you know, he answers prayers.
Can we just talk about the Book of Mormon, the experiment in the Book of Mormon? And if you will ask if these things are not true, he will manifest it unto you by the power of the Holy Ghost, which could be anything. It could be a good feeling. It could be no feeling. It could be a bad feeling. Whatever it is, it's always true. That's not a good scientific experiment.
Also, at 13. 6 months later, my parents were away for a week. It was night, I was bored and searching for something to do. I found my very first anti-Mormon book. Ooh, so maybe his parents, that's why they stopped being Mormon. I would never have found it if my father had kept it in his library of 3,000 books, but he had hidden it in his wardrobe under the slide projector. This book is called I Was a Mormon, and it's by Einar Anderson. The author claimed he was an expert, a former priest of the church. I read it from cover to cover within 2 hours. I was devastated. There was so much in the book that I'd never heard of before, and it was all bad. Reading, I felt my heart start to race. I couldn't breathe. My thoughts raced in circles. Showing the nervous system regulation that happens when you come up against evidence that contradicts your beliefs.
Cognitive dissonance is a bitch.
Basically, I was in panic. Before I tell you how I dealt with all of this and came out stronger, let me show you a few indicators that would have helped me back then, which I did not know.
If you actually just ignore it all, it's great.
Oh, this is just so boring and so long. Proposed indicators. 1, overstating of credentials. And then it just goes in to the fact that this guy who wrote this random anti-Mormon book claimed to be an expert in all things Latter-day Saint because he had the priesthood at some point.
Oh, because he used the term priest.
Yeah.
It's like, we don't call ourselves priests. And it's like, yeah, you actually do.
Second thing, a million pinpricks. This book was full of claims I'd never heard of before. Also, it was full of accusatory questions. This is a favorite technique to make someone panic in order to get an emotional reaction. Okay.
Ask them questions they don't have the answers to.
I saw this thought on the Mormon subreddit when I was perusing this morning. They were like, that's what anti-Mormons do. They overwhelm you with information. It's like, no, there's just an overwhelming amount of information proving that your beliefs are wrong. I'm sorry it's overwhelming. It is for all of us. But
And it's that way with everything. It's like, they just keep heaping on me all this evidence about climate change and about evolution, and they're just trying to confuse me. And it's like, or maybe if you just open yourself to all the information, it would be a lot easier.
Do you remember when in school or university you had to read a ton of text so massive that even looking at the pile of paper you automatically went into dummy mode where you didn't understand anything anymore, not because the text was a problem, but because you were overloaded with the sheer amount of information?
Me looking at any math book.
I know. The same overload happens in good old email hoaxes where technobabble is used.
He has been burned by some email hoaxes, you can tell.
There's no way that he didn't fall for anything in 20 years.
He's like, but the Nigerian prince who I sent $20,000 to is going to contact me again. I know it.
If there are enough words in a text that we can hardly understand, it leads us to accepting the author as an expert.
If people are only speaking in riddles.
Because he sounds so knowledgeable and intelligent and we know nothing. No, but if I'm reading like a DNA scientist explaining that, I'm probably going to be like, well, the fact that I don't understand these words certainly doesn't delegitimize them in any way. This can also be accomplished by feeding the reader a large number of totally unimportant but unknown factoids, thus bypassing the rational brain and directly accessing the emotions. No.
Outside of Mormonism, because I used to be just like this, and I was presented with all the information, went through the exact same thing, and being like, oh shit, and spiraling, and then be like, oh, I can actually make this stronger if I just keep researching, then I'll have the answers to help other people help their faith. Fast forward, this is me now, it didn't work out. But since then, pretty much anytime I'm confronted with new information that is like, a game changer to me, it's not difficult, and I may be like, okay, I need to become a little bit more informed to understand this, but that's just the part of it. If I see stuff that's obviously misinformation or a bad characterization of actual evidence, then I have the tools to do it, or I just set about gaining the tools to approach it. Like, it's only a huge problem when A, you haven't been given the information and have staked your whole identity on it.
Yeah, because there's nothing that can really be threatening to your perceived identity. There's nothing that can be that threatening once you just realized that you should just hold everything lightly and you could be wrong about absolutely anything, and you don't like base who you are on, what you believe, really, even though it obviously feels like quite a big part of your personality. Also, it's just completely not true that people bombard you with facts to try and access the emotional brain, because your emotions are wired in a situation where you're bombarded with facts to get you to double down in your existing beliefs. So it's the complete opposite of what this guy is saying.
I like how he did call them facts, so he's at least acknowledging that they are truths.
Well, unimportant but unknown factoids.
Unimportant.
In quotation marks, factoids, which makes them seem quainter and less real.
Anything that paints a bad, more descriptive picture than I've been taught in Sunday school is unimportant.
Ex-Mormon anthropologist Manuel W. Pedro commented about this on Quora, saying, "This tactic of unintentionally luring Latter-day Saints into a situation where they're bombarded with questions they don't know how to answer is a documented tactic used by these groups. And even before it was documented, it was clearly going on." We could talk endlessly about the tactics used by groups that are high control and don't want you to confront evidence that disproves their claims.
I'm just going to say, if the Mormon Church had good answers for the questions that ex-Mormons and other critics are raising, they would have put them forth a long time ago, because they put their best shit forward and it sucks. They're like, oh, we got to do a whole Ensign article about Nahum or whatever in the Book of Mormon, because this tiny little bit of evidence that we can extrapolate to imagine something else that concurs with the Book of Mormon, we're going to be all the fuck over that. But like, they don't have any answers to any of the really, really big and important stuff, and I guarantee you if they did, they'd be all over it. So this whole thing, like, even calling them tactics, it's like, no, this is just what happens. People leave the church because there's a mountain of evidence that they have never been conditioned to, and that has been hidden from them actively. They've never been given the tools to dissect, and are made to feel guilty, and part of their whole like persecution complex that there's this group of people who are using tactics and factoids to undermine your faith. And right? It's like, no, you're just observing a phenomenon, which is people are leaving because they're encountering all this information that can no longer be hidden from them.
Also, right, I mean, obviously, I think especially when you first leave the church, there's that impulse to want to tell your loved ones the things that you've learned because you're like, I've been bamboozled, I want you to know too. But I'd say generally ex-Mormons learn pretty quick that they're not going to get away with even talking about anything critical of the church with believers. So they might like try and like slip in one tiny thing to just get a loved one to, you know, think of it. But even that is like largely unsuccessful. I think there's certainly not this idea in ex-Mormon circles that the way to get Mormons to doubt their faith is to overwhelm them. That's actually like the opposite of what I think most ex-Mormons would say is wise. I think most people would say, you know, like keep it relaxed and just like if they ask you, then answer honestly, or maybe like ask one thought-provoking question, and then if they can't engage, just back off. Like that's what I'd say.
Though I would say there's been a huge success in like the CES letter and letter to my wife as far
but
as...
it's only bombarding you if you're choosing to read it. And there's like, does a book bombard you with facts? Does a textbook bombarding you just because it contains a lot of information? It's not like Jeremy Reynolds is like knocking on people's doors.
Yeah, right. He dedicated 2 years of his life going door to door with the CES letter to bombard people with facts.
Oh God, I just got a little preview of this next bit. When I was a kid, the Lighthouse Ministry and CARM, C-A-R-M, were the two big groups using this strategy. I haven't heard of either of those, but if you have, let us know.
Is Lighthouse the Tanners?
Maybe, yeah.
I think it might be.
Now, Mormon Stories, the Life After Ministry, haven't heard of that one, Mormon Think, and a number of other groups are all relying on the same abusive tactics.
Oh, geez.
You don't have to
just
watch
throwing
a
out
Mormon Stories video or do it. It's not... How's that abuse, just to be providing information that people that want
If it's a phenomena, then it's a tactic. And if it's a tactic, then it's abusive.
And if it's abuse, it's, get this, an act of psychological rape. Let me read this. Listen. He's left. I feared this would happen.
This is so dumb!
You don't get through a fair video without walking upset. They're trying to coerce you into a situation where they can bombard you with so many doubt-provoking questions. First of all, if they're just presenting you with a link that you can click.
I can't wait to, in this very article, I guarantee you, he's going to give us an explanation of why it was actually very good for Joseph Smith to have sex with teenage underage girls. Like,
so they're trying to coerce you into a situation where... How dare you use the word coerce? Into a situation...
Are they telling you that you're going to go to hell forever, that you're going to be cut off from your family, that you're not going to be able to attend your children's wedding if you don't read this bombardment of facts?
Or if you, a child, don't marry this old dude?
Are they going to ask for your gold teeth and your widow's mite to build their $100 billion stock portfolio?
They're trying to coerce you into a situation where they can bombard you with so many doubt-provoking questions that they can cause your resolve to collapse and your identity to fall apart. Very interesting, because number one, generally, again, the response when a believer of a high control group is bombarded with a lot of doubt-provoking questions is they'll just switch off and they'll just double down in what they know. But the identity falling apart bit, it's interesting that they've picked up on that, because I mean, that is the way high control groups operate, is they co-opt your identity, so then criticism of the group does feel like a criticism of your identity, so it does feel like your identity's about to fall apart if you accept.
If we were talking about the Jehovah's Witnesses and deconstructing Jehovah Witness beliefs, offering people a bunch of information about the problems with Jehovah Witness theology and policy and organization, would that still be psychological rape? Would that still be coercion? Or is it only that when it's against your beliefs?
To say that...
Is that what the missionaries are doing? Are they psychologically raping people that they go to people's houses? Is that, like... Do these people not think for a goddamn second?
Calling Mormon Stories psychological rapists.
Well, actually, ignoring actual rapists.
While defending your founder being a rapist. Calling Mormon Stories... Nothing Mormon Stories does is coercive, because there is no one is under any... No
one's putting a gun to your head and saying you have to watch this. Yeah. It's like, I'm literally just telling my story.
You can click block on every social media platform. You never have to engage with Mormon Stories if you don't want to. I mean, I guess they put up a billboard on the I-15, but all it says is like, got doubts about your faith? You're not alone. Ignore it. You don't have doubts about your faith. You're perfect. You don't want to be psychologically raped. Easy. Move on. Insane. If that sounds abusive, it doesn't. It's because that's what it is.
Because I said it, and I'm not an expert. I haven't been peer reviewed, but
I just saw that after he said, inside of that vacuum created by an act of psychological rape, they hope to impregnate you with their own belief system. The irony's so thick.
What the fuck? This is crazy! They're trying to rape you and impregnate you with their own belief system? Jesus!
God.
Literally, what?
Psychological rape, not really a term I'm a fan of in any context. Can't think of a reason to use it over other terms, you know? But, like, if it does exist, then it's, like, actual brainwashing tactics, you know, where you are co-opting a person's mind for your pleasure or personal gain.
Threatening
it's
them.
Certainly not having an ex-Mormon YouTube channel.
Like, threatening people with damnation. I already went into the spiel, but, like, oh my God, I can't.
The persecution complex is
outstanding.
And the Mormons are vibing with this on the Mormon subreddit. If that sounds abusive, it's because that's what it is. It's an extension of...
It doesn't sound abusive.
It's an extension of the cultural legacy of the Inquisition.
No, it's... Oh, you mean where religious people went and killed a bunch of people who didn't believe what they believed? Do you hear yourself? Are you crazy?
They can't torture you, but they can humiliate you and pressure you...
Why would facts humiliate you unless you were like, yeah, I guess I have been totally in the dark about this. I guess my church has left me totally incapable of understanding anything real about what's going on.
Can I just say, I just co-hosted Mormon Stories yesterday, and I have this thought every time I co-host Mormon Stories. John is so excessively concerned with being sensitive to Mormons. Like, he will try so hard to, like, sugarcoat certain things or just to, like... In my opinion, he goes too far in, like, pandering to Mormons because he so desperately wants to be, like, sensitive to them. So just the idea that it's, like, Mormon Stories is out to humiliate you, I haven't seen it. Might be. Mormon Stories isn't.
This is absurd. I didn't know this was going to be that bad shit.
This really escalated, didn't it?
You're really raping me with all your questions right now.
All right, new section.
Sorry, I have to just one more second. Just the irony, the total hypocrisy of saying that asking people questions and presenting them with facts is abuse akin to, but a
rape that leads to impregnation.
Yeah. But
which they're trying to ban abortion for.
But a religious and political leader sending a 14-year-old girl's parents away, her dad away, taking her under your wing, and then telling her that she'll be destroyed and the door closed against her unless she enters a secret marriage with you. That somehow isn't rape. That's actually really good. Facts and questions, abusive.
But see, what is happening right now is that you are being a psychological rapist. So that's kind of...
But I'm also getting psychologically raped. This is going to be triggering. I feel so bad. I hate this word. I hate that we're saying it. I hate that we're forced. Oh.
Okay, we continue. I once listened to an Italian radio broadcast. The announcer talked extremely fast, and I wondered how he could manage that. But on listening carefully, I heard that after every sentence, he would simply say la 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 la. If you only had a radio as a background noise, you would not notice that there was nothing behind it at all. That's a weird story. If you want to overwhelm someone with mass, each argument per se is irrelevant.
He's like, ever since that, I've adopted that as my strategy. I just say my bit, and then I'm like, la 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 la.
Also, ex-Mormons do not think that each argument is irrelevant. They will very much stand behind it. As long as you have the word count and enough question marks, you will reach your goal. C equals degree. But if the reader really takes apart one argument after the other, nothing remains. Yeah, except no one really can take apart one argument.
Then I would love to see somebody do it. We're still waiting. I think it's quite telling that of the thousands of Mormons that I've known throughout my life, I can count on one hand the number of people who, A, asked me about my faith issues, and then maybe one of them who was like, let me try to walk through this with you, and then ended up, like, very shortly being like, I just have to believe and you live your life.
We talked a lot about that phenomenon last week in our video, which was debunking narratives about ex-Mormons that are false, so if you haven't seen that.
So it's like, it is telling that not a single one of them is capable of answering these things, and, like, if it weren't such heavy-hitting questions and facts, you wouldn't see people leaving en masse, unless you're just assuming that everybody is so stupid and lazy and ignorant and sinful and slothful, which is what they do.
But from this person's perspective, I'm sure they would argue that, all those things have been debunked. Even though when you read those debunkings, you're like, well, that's exactly what this person is describing, of it just being a word salad and not actually focusing on any one thing, just trying to, like, cast enough doubt and,
Yeah.
Let me give you one example from the factoid Omnium Gatherum of our days, the CES letter.
Stop saying factoid. It's not 2008.
Maybe it's because they're German?
Maybe.
For instance, one critique is that the Book of Mormon, when quoting Isaiah, incorporates italicized words as if they were part of the original language, which they are not. The following example is given. Fascinating. Joseph incorporated words in his so-called translation that were not in the text to begin with. Let's try to read the first sentence of this verse, and let's omit the italicized words.
Let's just omit the whole section.
But basically it says, all Runnels does here is throw out accusations in the hope that the reader will go into dummy mode.
Wait, so does he not give an explanation? He's just like, yeah, they try to show you how there's words in Isaiah that weren't in the original record that are now in the Book of Mormon, so we have a mistranslation being copied into the Book of Mormon, similar to how the books of Mark, or sections, verses in the Book of Mark, were added by scribes long after the original documents were written, and again, not original, but, that then were copied into the Book of Mormon. You're saying that's a problem? And then he just walks away from it? Or does he actually give an explanation? He's just like, see, that's the kind of shit they're pulling.
You look at this, because I'm just like, I'm going into dummy mode.
I just think it's so funny when people are like, the Book of Mormon is the most true book that's ever been written, the most correct book on earth. There hasn't been any problems, and the Bible was actually corrupted by scribes and translators, so much of the plain and precious truths were lost. And then they're like, but all those mistakes in the Bible that were made by scribes somehow ended up in the Book of Mormon too, and his thing is just to be like, there's no way he couldn't do that. He had to include the bad translation, the made-up words, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. Just giving a more direct prophetic translation couldn't have worked. Sometimes when I get feeling really annoyed, I start to hear Tucker Carlson in my voice, and it makes me even more annoyed.
No, Tanner, don't go to that place.
So he hasn't answered anything. He just said Joseph Smith just could not have not done that.
That's literally,
that's his response. It's just saying he had to.
He had to do it. And
okay.
That's literally their response to everything, though. Like marrying kids, he had to do it. He had no choice. He couldn't not.
Have you even considered the angel that came in that was going to destroy him? Have you even thought about that for a second?
Maybe I'm stupid, but I still don't really understand what his argument is there.
So it's saying that in the original Hebrew or whatever that was written in, the scribes who translated it into Greek and Latin and then into English had to add their own words in order for sentence phrasing to make sense.
And
so Joseph Smith had to copy that exact translation, otherwise it wouldn't have made sense. It's just the only way, versus getting a direct revelation or using the actual translation of the original Isaiah, which he couldn't have done. He was copying out of his, and we see so many of the mistakes, particular to the Joseph Smith family Bible. That specific edition had multiple mistakes in it that show up in the Book of Mormon. He just had to.
Well, God was on his lunch break, so it was just like, you copy out of this for a little bit and I'll be back.
Yeah, exactly. Then we'll hit the stone again hard.
Yeah. Trust me, I got good stuff for you after lunch. Oh God. Tables, charts, and visualizations is the next subheader.
Actual abuse. Every time I see a table, a chart, or a visualization, I'm like, this is mental sexual abuse.
Pie charts? That's rape. We live in a time where a picture is easy to produce, so true, and a picture says more than 1,000 words. When a table is produced,
is picture to word count ratio getting inflated? What's the going?
When a table is produced, many people count the items on the table, but they do not read the words anymore. We see Do you read the words anymore?
Have you ever seen a table and been like, I better count all the elements here. I'm not going to read this shit, but I will count.
We see check marks in columns and we count the check marks, but we do not
don't! Nobody counts check marks.
We do not try to understand what the table or the chart really tells us.
You're speaking for yourself, my guy.
Why would someone do the effort of producing a visualization and then not be careful and honest with the contents?
This is such a self-tell.
Right.
Right. You know how nobody reads or comprehends shit, right? You know how I haven't read anything in years, right? You know I haven't looked at a table trying to understand, right? We all do that, right?
What charts have burned you? I need to know, because it's just this simple little section. This is the last bit, and then he just moves on.
It's his birth chart. He's like, there's at least 7 points of information, but...
So usage of tables, charts, and other visualizations per se is not of the devil. So so to speak.
When you have to clarify that tables are not per se a work of the devil, they can be leveraged.
But they should.
They can be turned on you.
The devil, like Kamala Harris, loves a pie chart and raping. So, usage of tables, charts, and other visualizations per se is not of the devil, so to speak. The per se and the so to speak combo. But whenever you see such a thing, don't skim over it. Go into detail. Take it as an invitation to be more careful with the information and not to accept it simply because it is visualized. Amen. Amen. I agree with that.
Any pie chart, I'm like, I just want pie. I'm not going to evaluate this.
Next point, one-sidedness. We have... If a text is one-sided for no good reason, be careful to accept the picture painted. But if it's for a good reason, like justifying Joseph Smith coercing children into marrying him...
Then anyone who disagrees with you is on the dark side.
A good example from the CES letter is Book of Mormon geography. A critic of the church, Vernal Holly, produced a Book of Mormon map from the Great Lakes area in 1983. He claimed that not only does the Book of Mormon geography fit with this modern map, but also that Joseph Smith derived the names of cities and landmarks from real towns and landmarks in the area. This was debunked immediately. Reynolds knows this.
Okay, saying debunked is already disingenuous.
Just because someone said.
Yeah, like that's their whole thing is being like, you already said this. It's debunked, and therefore it is. And it's like, I haven't seen an explanation of why it's debunked. I just trust that the debunkers have done fair duty. Like, what are you talking about? The problem with that map is that some of those cities were not known by those names at the time Joseph Smith was writing the Book of Mormon. But several, in fact, were. Like the hill, Cumorah being an island of Captain Kidd fame that Joseph Smith was regularly reading about. And
but if some of them weren't, then why? How on earth did it end up that he still used the same names? If he did you just lucky guess, or is it just like not all of them were?
Yeah, not all of them. But like all these names and things are from popular vernacular and things and biblical stories in his day. Like it's not totally just a whole entire fabricated from whole cloth lie.
This guy then goes on to say, Reynolds knows this, he even agrees that his argument is very weak and the replies are far stronger. So then they share a screenshot of Jeremy on Reynolds basically saying that he's kind of 90 to 95% on removing the Book of Mormon geography maps out of the CES letter because he learned that maybe they're not as accurate as he previously thought. Which sounds like
adapting to new information.
Honesty.
Sounds like the peer review process is working out for us.
So he's basically saying, like, I'm gonna in this Reddit post that they're using as a weapon against him for some reason, that he thinks he's gonna take it out just because it's not that good. And then he says, yet he never mentions that. He presents a weak argument as if it was very strong, painting a very one-sided picture just for the sake of it. By the way, I downloaded the CES list last week to see if it contains the disclaimer Reynolds talked about, because Reynolds talked in this Reddit post about how he is thinking about including a disclaimer. He basically says, even though the maps and list have been updated and corrected, I believe that it's the weakest part of the CES letter. So, the evidence isn't that strong.
So it's been updated to match a current understanding of information, and you're just mad that it's still there and has been updated? In what way are you correcting the very principle you're trying to highlight? In which ways are you acknowledging the fault of your argument?
And didn't you talk earlier about how, the source doesn't necessarily, determine whether the point being made is good? Well, it seems like there's still a good point being... Even whether you're not... Jeremy's process with updating the CES letter is to your taste. Maybe he was slow to update the disclaimer, or I don't really know. I haven't dove into this too closely, but anyway. Should we move on to the next point?
Yeah.
If something is too good to be true, it most likely isn't.
If it's too good to be true, it most likely...
Then it probably isn't true.
Okay.
Assume that someone claims to have found the following...
Like what if you just paid 10% of your money to a real estate investment corp posing as a religion, you'll get a mansion in heaven? Invest now! They
never tell you you're going to get a cute little 2-bedroom cottage.
No.
That's small and quaint. And
a little garden hovel.
Yeah. Assume that someone claims to have found the following Mayan sign from the late pre-classic period, and then it's just a fake sign. Pretending to be a city of Zarahemla sign. What would be your gut reaction? Mine would be, this is too good to be true. Some people use this expression to show their glee at a bullseye they thought was never coming. To me, this is a warning signal. If it is too good to be true, then it is most likely is not true. But evidence of Mormonism being false is by no means too good to be true from your perspective. What do you mean?
our sexual predator is the one who happened to do it right for the right reasons, it's not too good to be true. Trust me.
The claim I mentioned earlier that geneticists have allegedly proven that American Indians come from the Middle East at around 600 BC falls under this category.
Oh, he's saying that there were Mormon apologists claiming that that genetics proved that Native Americans came from the Middle East. And there was that article going around for a long time that people were sharing, but totally misunderstanding.
Okay.
I wrote an article about it on our website that I will post in the description box.
So this is kind of a salient point, but it's like, now apply that.
He's talking about Mormon favoriting hoaxes not turning out true. What you're saying is all the best proofs that have ever shown up about Mormonism have turned out to be hoaxes. Don't get your hopes up on a really solid evidence for Mormonism.
The claims, which also seem too good to be true, are true. If something is too bad to be true, it most likely isn't. That is an IQ test riddle. If something is too bad to be true, it most likely isn't.
Like what, the Holocaust?
Didn't happen. Too shit. I once read a claim that the first presidency is conducting secret satanic ceremonies with lizard aliens in the caves beyond the Salt Lake Temple.
Oh,
okay,
you read QAnon.
That claim really seems out there. Yeah, that is pervasive. We're all saying it. But there are people who believe it, even though it's easily identified as too bad to be true.
How? Identified, prove it. I mean, yeah, it sounds absurd, but like, prove it. You're just you just saying, oh, that's not true, or this is true, or he just had to, isn't an argument, isn't proof, isn't evidence. I'm sorry to abuse you with all my facts.
Is easily identified as too bad to be true. Yeah, and also...
Like, no one can go in those minds. You cannot prove that that's not true. Like, it is unfalsifiable.
A not so crazy example was the lead plate purportedly written by John D. Lee claiming that Brigham Young ordered the Mountain Meadows massacre. This would not be a sign of a derailed mind like with the lizard aliens, but nevertheless it felt too bad to be true and it wasn't.
This is so disingenuous. Highlighting a starkly absurd thing that practically no one is saying. I've never met
People
anybody.
People are not leaving Mormonism because they have bought into the idea that there's secret satanic lizard rituals going on.
If anything, it's evangelicals who are like even more drenched in the sauce than you, but still some people you would align with politically and all that. Nobody is actually leveraging that as a criticism. And then to take that and then to take a valid criticism of Mormonism, which is that Brigham Young had a hand in the Mountain Meadows massacre, which he did. He taught that, oh my God.
Was that lead plate bullshit, by the way?
Yeah, I don't think I've never even heard about the lead plate because I don't care, because no one is asserting a lead plate is evidence that Brigham Young ordered that thing. Like, all you have to do is look at the context where Brigham Young is actively teaching that we need to get revenge on the United States of America for killing Joseph Smith, that apostates and people who oppose the church need to be murdered. That's the only way that they can achieve salvation.
Mercy.
Yeah, like, there's so much more, that John D. Lee is his actual adopted son who's taking direct orders from him in all things. Like, that the Danites are running amok in Salt Lake City and killing people who are disagreeing with the church. Like, all this is perfectly substantiated. But by saying, like, oh, the lead thing didn't happen, therefore Brigham Young is totally off the hook for everything. I just can't with this guy.
Okay, next section, emotions. One ex-Mormon told me that when faced with anti-Mormonism for the first time, he felt like the guy in the old REM song, Losing My Religion. Was it John DeLynn? Because he karaoke's that song at every party. And I do feel psychologically attacked sometimes. It took me long to shake this emotional picture. Appealing to feelings alone is a very simple way to circumvent our logical brain and go directly to emotional decision-making. Ding, ding.
Oh, sorry, what was the experiment about the Book of Mormon all about? Was it about feelings or...
Yeah, thank you, Tana. So listen to your emotions. Are they being manipulated by the text you're reading? How? If you actively take away your emotions, is the text still compelling? Does the author try too hard to raise emotions? If you take your emotional attachment to Mormonism away, is the Book of Mormon compelling? No.
Is it even good?
No, that's a peer-reviewed answer. First Vision. God, can you just go watch our First Vision video that we did against Fair? Because I'm like, but I guess we can just...
This is one of, I already know where he's going with this.
Time for another example from the CES letter. Despite knowing there is no smoking gun, while wanting to make his readers believe there were one, Runnels calls one of his
always
chapters...
presuming in the premise that what you hope to demonstrate in the conclusion is a fallacy and saying there is no smoking gun, just for saying it without substantiating that at all is fallacious.
That's very much smoking guns that Mormonism isn't true. Runnels calls one of his chapters First Vision, Concerns and Questions, but then he sets the stage by quoting President Hinckley, as you can see here. And then the little quote is, our whole strength rests on the validity of that first vision. It either occurred or did not occur. The reader now expects the smoking gun. Stakes are high. Reader's capacity to reason is reduced.
Why?
Again, if you are a believing Mormon who's been seduced into reading the CES letter, somehow you've stumbled upon it, you're in it.
Overwhelmed, coerced.
You have millions of years of evolution, or at least hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, working in your favor in terms of maintaining your belief in the church. Like, we are hardwired to protect our deeply held beliefs at all costs, even when confronted with evidence that it's false.
And to stay in the good standings of the people of the community that we're born and raised in.
So again, just this idea that, ex-Mormons are trying to use emotion and, it's just not true, because everything is working in in favor of you maintaining your beliefs. That's why it's so hard to reckon with evidence that Mormonism isn't true, and that's why people don't hardly ever just come across one thing and then be like, well, this isn't true. I mean, some people do read the CES letter and they're like, damn, right away, but for us, it certainly wasn't the case.
I didn't read the CES letter till after I left, and I was like,
neither.
oh, this could have saved me some time.
I read 2 pages while a believer, and then my emotions kicked in, shut it completely down, and I doubled down in my beliefs.
Exactly like this guy.
Yeah. Next, we are told that there are 4 accounts the church admits to. There could be more, and the church did that not earlier than 2013, or didn't admit to the multiple First Vision accounts. The implication is that the church lied until it could not uphold the lie anymore, but still it is portrayed as not open and honest.
What, only because in all of its official portrayals, it only does one way and never draws attention to the others or the contradictions held within them? Interesting.
I know, they're like, oh, it's actually faith promoting that there's different details in each one. Never mind the fact that they're all completely contradictory, so they don't work together at all. But it's like, if it was faith promoting, then you would have been using it before 2013.
Oh, but there was an Ensign article in 1978 that mentioned it. It wasn't written by one of the first presidency or the Council of the 12 Apostles. It was just kind of slid in there. So how could you say that we're not being honest and upfront about this?
Also, it's like, how else are you... He's saying, basically criticizing the idea that the church only admits things because it had to, but it's like, then how else do you explain that so much stuff has only been admitted in the 2010s since it became widespread online? We
have records of prophets Joseph Fielding Smith, who was the official historian of the church, ripping out a page of another prophet's diary because it would contradict the information previously or the narrative that's being held by the majority of the church.
Brigham Young told people not to read Joseph's mum's autobiography because in it she talked about things like Joseph Smith coming up with stories about Native American people when he was as young as 9.
And then literally editing the history of the church and the Journal of Joseph Smith to read differently, to take out references that would harm the modern narrative.
While the church actually has been publishing about the 1832 account at least since 1972.
At least since that one Ensign article in 1972. Quietly tucked away there in the back, which you have to be a paid subscriber to get.
The reader goes away with the assumption that the church is very late to the party. Why don't we just do a little survey of people that were in the church, pre-2010? How many of you knew about the multiple First Vision accounts and knew what was in them, enough to know that they actively contradicted each other? And that Joseph didn't even mention God and Jesus in one of them. And
you know who was late to the party? David Whitmer and the other saints who didn't hear about the first vision for 12 years, having never had it mentioned to them, or the restoration of the priesthood, or any of that. Imagine knowing someone for decades and then being like, oh, and by the way, I saw God, and that's really what started this. And
by the way, totally forgot to bring this up. This crazy thing happened. Okay, next, Runnels quotes only 15% of the 1832 account, and then writes conclusions and questions and concerns about it that are longer than the whole 1832 account itself.
Yeah, a lot to dissect. You'd be surprised.
That's what you do in an essay, is you quote the bits that are pertinent to your questions.
And again, in all of these, he's saying, here's the problem. It's not a problem. But not offering any solution, not answering the questions, not deconstructing the criticisms and offering a better narrative.
The questions are designed to raise negative emotions. No, the questions are designed to make the reader think about logical fallacies or about, conflicting information or the
coercing someone to think. I would rather not think. And anytime someone tries to make me, that is coercion. That is abuse.
Also, assigning motives to Jeremy Runnels is also a pretty weak thing to do.
Especially if you ever meet Jeremy Runnels. I cannot imagine a sweeter being on the planet.
I know.
Like, people talk shit about John and us and other people, and I'm like, man, whatever. But don't talk shit about Jeremy Runnels. Grow the fuck up.
Yeah. Also, he only compares the 1832 and the official account, leaving the other two untouched. Okay, if the 1832 account contradicts the official account...
What are we supposed to do with that?
What about that? Like, it doesn't really matter whether or not you touch the other two or not. You still have to address that. Like, that, if that... Again, I'm not like caught up on like what's in the CS letter enough to like know all the ins and outs, but I'm like, who cares if the other two were untouched? If just comparing two alone is that damning, does it really matter?
You didn't even include all the unimportant information that would have caused me to think even more. They're trying to
imply that if you would have included all of it, then it would have made sense. No, that's not true. We've read all of them. It does not fit together more the more you read. It's just that Jeremy's got to like condense information into this one document, which you're already like bemoaning him for making too long.
That's what I was just
going to say. He's trying to overwhelm you with evidence.
You're like, on the one hand, it's like too much information, that's abuse. Not enough information,
abuse.
Also abuse.
And so then it says, and then he makes the following conclusion. As with the Rock in the Hat story, I did not know that there are multiple final First Vision accounts. I did not know of their contradictions or that the church members did not know about a First Vision until 12 to 22 years after it supposedly happened. I was unaware of these omissions in the mission field, and I was never taught or trained in the MTC to teach investigators these facts. Very reasonable thing for Jeremy to write. And then this guy says, this is relevant as he now links back the Rock in the Hat story with the unsuspicious claim from the beginning. There are four accounts. And he blames the church for everything.
Not hard to see. I mean, if the church has all the facts available to them and they're so open and honest, you think that in all their portrayals and in the representatives who are dedicating 2 years of their life going through an official, I went through the MTC for 9 weeks, and then for 2 years, all day, all night, every second being devoted to this thing, you'd think you'd get a little information or at least one portrayal about a realistic portrayal of how this went down.
Oh, so he's trying to shit on Jeremy for being like, and now he brings up the Rock in the Hat again. Another famous example of the church calling something an anti-Mormon lie and hiding it for ages until the internet was, forcing them to reveal it. Now, obviously, it's only reasonable to teach an investigator the basics and not every minutiae of church history. Every minutiae.
It's not even the minutiae.
The First Vision wasn't recorded until 22 years later, even though they kind of pitch it as if it was like at the time he was telling people about it, and that's why he was so persecuted.
Or the Rock in the Hat. He got these gold plates in the Urim and Thummim, and with him he translated the Book of Mormon. It's like, no, the plates weren't in the room. He had a rock in a hat, and he looked at it, and he said the word.
Minutia.
It's a whole different story.
Teaching people the real story instead of just the completely made-up version of the story. Minutia. But by the way the stage has been set, the reader is most likely already in awe about all that he did not know, and his rational abilities are already reduced.
Then please give us a better explanation. Or are you just going to tell us that he's wrong and just emotionally manipulating us with facts?
Your rational abilities are reduced, babe. He is set up to accept the logic. That logic disproves the first vision, but nothing like this has happened. Yes, it has.
Can you use some logic to prove it then?
I know. Like
literally he's just saying, people argue with us. And they're wrong and abusive.
Please go watch
there. I think it's been settled.
Video.
Debunked.
We dove into this so deep, but it's just like completely unhinged to suggest that that the accounts of the first vision are not problematic. It's just ridiculous.
At the end, he's going to be like, "Now, if anyone ever." An appropriate response is, "I'm rubber, you're glue. Whatever you say bounces off of me and sticks to you." That's his whole.
We haven't even brought up the fact that like one of the accounts of the first vision, again, watch our video, was created by Joseph back when he believed that the Godhead
Trinity
was one being. And then it just so happens that the later one that he wrote down was the one where the vision was not the Trinity, but three separate bits. It's just like, you can't, it's completely in line with him workshopping everything. Like at the same time he was workshopping the first vision, he was workshopping his view of the Godhead, and his first vision accounts reflect that. Like they do not like add to each other or, enhance your faith by looking at all of them. They are completely contradictory. They were written for different reasons at different times.
Amazing. And at the same time, the Book of Mormon is being written, which also includes that Trinitarian view of the God. And despite being the most correct book ever produced, still had to be changed to alter that doctrinal understanding of God. Interesting that the person who wrote it, Joseph Smith, also said that in order to be a proper messenger of God, you have to be able to understand the true nature of God and his character. That's the first step of having faith unto salvation, as Joseph Smith teaches in the lectures on faith. And yet, for some reason, couldn't get that right off the bat.
It's like nothing's more important than having a clear idea of exactly what the Godhead is and not changing it. It's like, projection is real and it's everywhere. Next section is Joseph's polygamy. This has just turned into like an apologetics 101. I know it's kind of nice that people watching this can get a sense, who are from other religions, can just kind of get a sense of when people are like, how come Mormons believe this stuff? These are their best guys.
These are the best guys. And the ones, I mean, this is all just like, deny, say that you were abused, shut down your ears, la 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 la. The people who are actually coming up with explanations are way worse. It's like, oh yeah, horses was probably tapirs. Carnal intercourse, that was passing meat.
Let's look at another argument where Runnels tries to fool his readers.
Couldn't
Runnels
possibly
writes,
have legitimate concerns that you could graciously and lovingly help him overcome. He's got to be deceitful.
Mormon apologetics about Joseph's polygamy is the cream of the crop, in my opinion. It kind of just like says it all, because it's just such an unjustifiable thing in my mind to coerce teenage girls into marrying you when you're a middle-aged religious leader who everyone in your community like reveres as a prophet. But this guy's going to try. So he quotes Jeremy in the CS letter saying, out of the 34 women that Joseph Smith married, 7 of them were teenage girls as young as 14 years old. Joseph was 37 when he married 14-year-old Helen Mar Kimball, 23 years his junior. Even by 19th century standards, this is shocking. This guy says, well, technically there is correct information here. 2 of the women sealed to Joseph were a few weeks short of 15 years.
Stop it. Stop using the few weeks short.
Was it a few weeks?
No.
I thought even on the church's official thing it said a couple of months shy, and now it's gone down to a few weeks. 3 of them were 19 and 3 were well over 17.
Oh, very old.
God, well over 17 and 2 months. Phew. The picture painted is wrong. All of this is shocking. While in fact...
Why is it wrong? Has he said other than that he doesn't like it?
So he said, the information is technically correct because 2 of the women were a few weeks short of 15, 3 of them were 19, and 3 were well over 17. The picture painted is wrong because
I don't like it.
Only 2 sealings could be shocking to modern sensibilities. In 1880, the age of consent was set at 10 or 12 in most states.
If you have to defend your guy by saying at least he did a 10-year-old
with the exception of Delaware, where it was 7. Thanks for clarifying.
Oh, good. Oh, goody. If the prophet can't even be better than people marrying...
7-year-olds.
Oh, my God.
Most of the states didn't have a minimum marriage age back then. It was legal.
They did have anti-bigamy laws, though, that he did break. So it's like, on the one hand, it's like, well, it wasn't illegal, and it's like, A, it was, and B, it was disturbing because according to census records, young people only married people of comparable ages. They weren't marrying people 20 years their senior. They weren't being married to people who told them they had to keep it a secret. They weren't being married to people who threatened to destroy them if they didn't go through with it.
Mm-hmm. Or was secretly married to their sisters or mothers.
Yeah, or their mothers.
Yeah, this is like exactly what Mormon apologists try and accuse others of doing, just kind of obfuscating, is that how you say obfuscating? The truth. When it's like, you're saying it was okay because it was legal, when it in fact wasn't legal because of the bigamy laws, but you're only focusing on the one piece of it, and then you just constantly only ever focus on like your weird reasoning for that one piece, never fitting it together because it doesn't fit together because obviously it's all bullshit.
And those weren't the only 2 sealings that would give pause. Let's just start off with the very first sealing, which happened when Joseph Smith didn't even have the sealing power. When he married, or rather had a transaction in the barn with hired help living with him, got caught, and then was like, actually, we're married.
What if I told you that God told me?
You're never going to believe this.
Can I just say, this is going to continue getting worse, but this is the most morally reprehensible argument, apologetics for Joseph's polygamy, in my opinion. I would rather someone have just convinced themselves that it didn't happen, because then at least, that's like more morally sound. It's like, okay, so you're not okay with child marriage, and so you somehow genuinely believe that it didn't happen, because you recognize that if it did happen, that would just be like a...
Right.
This person says, so after justifying it by saying that, well, the age of consent was 10 or 12 or 7, says, and Wikipedia tells us that such a marriage is not illegal today in the US. And then it quotes Wikipedia saying, in many cases, minors in the US may be married when they are under the age of sexual consent in their state, which ranges from 16 to 18. In Tennessee, 3 10-year-old girls were married to men aged 24 to 31. Meanwhile, in Alabama, a 74-year-old man married a 14-year-old girl. This is your
highlighting the worst top possible people and being
actually, sexual abuse crimes happen all the time in the US, and sometimes they're legal. So, don't know what your issue's about.
This is unhinged.
And then he says, and it happens between 2000 and 2015, 31 guys over the age of 60 married underage girls.
Okay.
Are you okay with that? Like, is that cool with you? Is that what you're saying? Like, because people, it's like saying, like, yeah, but
60 people are doing it. Couldn't be wrong. That's just peer review.
It's like, well, probably millions of people are around the world every day. Like, does that mean that it's like okay? Like, what fucking logic is this? Like, how can you stand by this for a minute? Anyway, and then he says, also, Jeremy leaves out the fact that Joseph Smith was also sealed to women who were older than he, the oldest of which being 78.
Yeah, the ones who happen to have property.
I know. It's like, and he also married old rich women, so don't know what you're
Riddle me that.
Clearly, such a marriage would have been seen as equally shocking by today's standard. I don't think equally. I don't think an old woman is as equally shocking as a child, but it is pretty up there in terms of shocking. It's not ideal.
When people were shocked that Keanu Reeves was married to someone 10 years younger who had gray hair, and they're like, wow, dating an old woman, incredible. And it's like, he's literally...
I'm losing my goddamn mind. Reynolds, so he said that, well, he also married old women, then says, but Reynolds exclusively focuses on the ceilings where the woman was a teen. Why? Because of the shock value. Yes!
Yeah, he's got it.
Because marrying children is more disgusting. Marrying old women is weird, but at least they're old enough to consent. Not really.
There's factors at play.
But it's like, yes, of course we're going to focus on fucking the exploitation of children in the pornography world over the exploitation of adults. It's not because we don't care about the exploitation of adults, but one is clearly worse. Surely you can get that in your tiny brain.
You keep bringing up how he married children. You don't want to focus on the fact that he sent men on missions and then married their wives. And that only happened twice. Critics say it happened all the time. It only happened twice.
Who in their right mind is reading this being like, oh, yeah, I feel so much better, actually. This happens all the time. A 74-year-old in Alabama married a teenage girl just last year.
Wow. Yeah, there are worse people out there, thank God.
Reynolds, then he goes on to talk about...
It's just crazy how prophets can't even be better than the people in their generation. They always have to be teamed up with the absolute worst humanity has to offer.
So then I say we just end here. Basically, this guy then goes into Joseph claiming that Joseph coerced the women, which we know he did. We did a whole
What, did he present them with facts and questions? Fact, you will be destroyed. Fact, your dad's gone, can't take care of you. Fact, I'm the prophet. Do you have any questions? I thought not.
God. Yeah, we did a whole video on Joseph's coercion of underage girls, so I just feel like you've seen what this guy has to offer apologetics-wise. I don't think we get anything more out of, just fucking up our nervous systems by continuing to read. You get the general gist. I think we've ended on a real low note with Jeremy's only talking about child marriages because they're shocking. Not because Jeremy has any moral objection. It can't possibly be that child marriages are wrong. I'm losing the ability to speak,
Jesus.
so I just cannot believe that was his line of logic. That the age of consent was 10.
Okay, this is such a tell. He then talks about Mary Rollins something, who apparently had an angel visit her. And keep in mind, this is in the day where all things are the cause of spirit defenders, angels, ghouls, goblins. Martin Harris saw a deer and was like, that is Jesus. Like, this is a culture steeped in folk magic. So, like, having an overwhelming feeling is like, oh, an angel came to me and let me know it's true. I felt all this cognitive dissonance by being forced into a situation that I didn't want. But when I eventually just let go and was like, it's God, I felt good. Yeah, that's how that works. And then he says, by the way, Mary is one of the cases where we have no evidence that there were sexual relations between her and Joseph. Oh, great. So then the marriage with children, we do have evidence. Thanks for pointing it out.
But thank God he's already clarified that if there was sex, that's also fine because this old pervert in Alabama did it last year. So don't worry, guys.
Well, if Florida man did it, then it's fine if
Literally.
Joseph Smith, the prophet of the Restoration, did.
I'm like, sorry, you're citing cases from Tennessee and Alabama and expecting me to just somehow get on board with this.
And drag is the problem. Wow, this is...
Fuck this. If you want to, please support us on Patreon for doing this. Please.
I have a question, and I'm sorry if it's coercive and abusive, but will you give me money?
Yeah, this is such a long video. There's no point continuing. This was supposed to be us diving into a few different Mormon apologetics, but I feel like we've just ended up giving you just kind of an overview of the way that Mormon apologetics work. If you're a newcomer to the space, now you get it. It's basically this. There's different flavors. There's, different levels of unhinged, but like this is kind of standard. Just being like, yeah, he did marry kids, and we're fine with it, and it strengthens our faith.
And it could be worse.
Yeah.
He could have been living in Alabama, so...
If he had wanted to marry 10 or 12, that would have been fine too. In Delaware, he could have done 7, so he was actually a really good guy. He could have had a 7... No, cut me off.
He could have been like Muhammad and married a 9-year-old. Interesting that he called himself the Muhammad of America. And just interesting.
We love you all. And now, oh God, thank
Comments
God.
is actually short for compliment.
Complimentoids.
Compliment.
We're going over to Patreon now to calm down with some 80s Mormon fiction. We'll
I
be
need a
reading
palate cleanse.
Chapter 5 of Stephanie. If you're not in on the series yet, it's a new standalone series from the author Jack Wayland who wrote Charlie. We already read his 3 books in the Charlie universe. This is a different one, so dive in with us on Patreon.
A lot more fun than this.
Yeah, there's a lot of drugs in this book, a lot of partying, so, it's a good time.
All right, thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Sorry for abusing you with so many facts and questions. I really didn't mean to unload all that on you. Sorry for coercing you into clicking on this video, but I do it out of love.